And we are live.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Aaron Weiner. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist based outside Chicago and an addiction specialist. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is how do you know when opioids become a problem? Because this is an issue that is becoming more and more common because people are taking opioids. Maybe they've been prescribed them. Probably if they haven't been prescribed them, it's a lot easier to know if they're a problem. But if you have taken them, say you've got pain, you had an injury, something's going on, and you're wondering, do I need to be concerned about this? Do I need to be concerned about my use? My hope for you today is that you'll leave feeling like you can answer that question. You know where you stand, or if there's someone else in your life who's using opioids, you'll know where they stand. And then at least the basics about what you can do about that. So the context for this issue, you probably know a lot about already, but that is that we are in the middle of the opioid epidemic, which has been superimposed, of course, on top of our pandemic that we're in right now because of COVID. But unfortunately, even before COVID hit, if you look at that graph there on the left, we were seeing an increase in overdose deaths. Despite all the work that we've done, workshops like these, it was going up. Actually, we had the most overdose deaths ever in 2019 after we did see a slight dip in 2018. But as you can see in the graph on the right, as the pandemic took hold, we've just seen more and more and more overdose deaths. And right now across the country, depending on where you are, there's been a spike between 30 and 50% in more overdose deaths during this period than in the year prior. So that graph on the left is going to see a very sharp uptick, which is really tragic, but means that we need to be all the more vigilant because we did have 81,000 overdose deaths between June 2019 and May 2020, and that's just even the beginning of the pandemic. What we're looking for right now in terms of the overdose side actually has been synthetic opioids. So we're in what's called wave 3 of the opioid epidemic, where wave 1 was a lot of prescription overdoses. Wave 2 saw this increase in heroin deaths, but now fentanyl is actually the primary killer. And fentanyl is up to 1,000 times stronger than heroin. It's 100 to 1,000 times stronger than heroin or morphine or Norco. And so it's very, very, very easy to overdose. There was a photo released that I think just really sums it up perfectly, which is that what you're looking at there is a lethal dose of heroin on the left and a lethal dose of fentanyl on the right. And it's just a few grains if you don't have a very high tolerance. And so it's very easy for this to be, for a drug to be contaminated with fentanyl, for heroin to be contaminated with fentanyl, and for someone to accidentally die. So we don't want someone overdosing on any type of opioid. And so we need to make sure that people are not on that track, because an overdose is the end of the line. There's a lot of things that lead up to that. And ideally, we want to catch someone before they get to the point where they're overdosing so that they don't actually end up killing themselves or coming that close. So to start things off, what is an addiction? That's what I want to define for you first, because if you don't know what a problem is, it's kind of hard to intervene. So there's different tiers essentially that we look for in terms of addiction. The first is physiological dependence. And this is a natural bodily adaptation, would happen to anyone. So anyone who takes opioids develops a tolerance to them if they use them enough, and then would go into withdrawal when they stop. They might have cravings. But this alone actually is not what we call an addiction, because you can very likely still have control if you just have a physiological or a biological dependence. An example of this is if you're taking opioids for chronic pain and you're just using them as prescribed. You might be on a high dose, but it's actually still controlled within the bounds that have been prescribed to you. Things have not gone off the rails. However, if you were to try to stop, you would go into withdrawal because you're on a high enough dose that your body has done that neuroadaptation. So that's physiological dependence. That is not addiction, but it does mean that you're dependent physically on those opioids, and that if you got off of them, you'd have that withdrawal. It's worth mentioning as well that opioids aren't actually the right thing for chronic pain most of the time. And this is a big part of how the opioid epidemic got its wings, essentially, is that they were prescribed for chronic pain when that's really not what they're for, because you will develop a tolerance to the opioids, and then you'll go up on your dose, and then you'll go up on your dose, and then you'll go up on your dose. That's not the sort of thing you want for a chronic problem. Now, the other side of all sorts of substances, opioids as well, is this psychological dependence, which is the other half of addiction, which is when you feel like you need the substance to cope, but it's not necessarily like your body is asking for this. So this is separate, right? You can feel like you need a substance to get through your day, to be okay, but it's not that your body's asking for it. So an example of this is if you're self-medicating for emotional problems, or you're taking pills before or after stressful events to try to either cope with it better or to recover. You're not really using it for pain. You're using it for emotions, and you're using it either proactively or reactively like that. So it's like you can have both of them at the same time, and that's honestly what we're about to get to, but that is a separate process than the physical part in the body. So then lastly, there is the substance use disorder or addiction, and that is a combination of physiological dependence and psychological dependence, along with escalating use and consequences. So this means that you've got both of those types of dependence, and you're clearly seeing that you're using more and more and more. If you're getting a prescription, say that's not enough anymore. So you're either buying street drugs or getting pills from other people, or you've got some clearly excessive use. You might be also jumping from doctor to doctor, trying to supplement your prescription, kind of like cobbling together the amount that you need to try to avoid withdrawal. That's usually what addiction looks like. And then that part about consequences is even though bad things are happening in your life, you keep doing it anyway. You're not even thinking about another way to approach the problem. The answer is just always more opioids. And so based on what you see here, I wanted to boil this down, make it as simple as possible. If something's a problem, you're watching for 4 key themes. And this goes for any substance, opioids included. The first is purpose. Why are you using the substance? And the big red flag is if you are using the substance to cope with your emotional problems in your life. If you are using any substance like that, that is how you use it with the frequency necessary to develop that physical addiction and part of what creates this compulsive feeling. So if you're not just using it for pain anymore, but you're using it because you either like the way it makes you feel or it numbs you out emotionally, that's a red flag. The second to watch for is the quantity and then type you're using. So what I mean by this is that sometimes there's clearly an amount of a substance that someone's taking that is excessive. Like if you're taking a lot of pills or you're drinking, like 6, 8 beers at a sitting, or like a fifth of some. I mean, like there's sometimes an objectively large amount that you could say, you know what, maybe this is a problem. But the type definitely matters for opioids as well. And what I mean by type is if you are using illicit opioids, if you're buying them off the street or taking someone's prescription that's not yours, which is also of course illegal, that probably means it's a problem, to be perfectly honest with you, because you're doing something very risky. You're engaging in illegal activity for reasons that you probably could try to meet whatever needs you're having in other ways, either with a legal prescription, if that was an option for you, or a different pain management strategy, or seeing a therapist if you're trying to numb emotional pain, or using an antidepressant, for example, for that. So buying anything illegally off the street is a big warning sign, or taking pills that don't belong to you. The third is control. Is this something that is clearly under control, or does it seem to be growing? Do you end up constantly running out early or taking more some days and less on others? Does it feel unstable? If you wanted to stop, say if you were saying, I want to get off the opioids, and then it seems like you just can't, and you keep going back and you can't follow through, that's a really big red flag as well. And the last are these consequences. Is it causing problems at work? Is it causing problems at home? Are you having physical issues? Are family members talking about how you're sedated or loopy? Is it starting to become this focal point of your life? And is it causing damage? If it's something that's causing damage and you're still doing it, that is a big red flag, right? Because that means that there's something about that matters more to you than all of these potentially mounting problems that are cropping up in your life, or the risks that you're taking. If, say, you're doing something that's illegal, you're choosing to do that anyway. So there's no hard and fast rule for whether or not something's a problem. That's something that everybody has to decide for themselves. But these 4 things, if you're either looking at your own behaviors or you're looking at somebody else in your life, be it alcohol, be it opioids, be it anything, if you're seeing that a lot of these are kind of wiggly and it's not clear that they're okay, that's a sign that it might actually be a problem, that if it hasn't already caused those consequences in somebody's life, it very well might soon. So then the last part of what I want to talk to you briefly about today is what now? So say you determine that you think you've got an addiction, you've got or at least you're dependent in some way, or you know someone in your life. What comes next? The first thing you should do is talk to your doctor. These disorders grow in secret. So if you actually talk to someone, if you talk to your physician or anybody else for that matter, but certainly your physician, and say, I'm worried about my use here, what are my options? They will help you, because we actually have a lot of treatments for this. That's actually, I think, my third bullet on this slide, but there are options to get you out of the cycle that doesn't necessarily require you going through awful withdrawal or being left high and dry. You've got to be able to trust your medical team, and they can help you. If you feel like you can't, though, we have hotlines for this, actually. 1-800-662-HELP is a 24/7 hotline if you're having an addiction issue, if you're having an opioid issue. Also, they're in the state of Pennsylvania, they have an online chat. So if you have the slides and you click that link, or if you just Google it, you'll get to the website through the state of Pennsylvania. You can you can chat with someone online 24/7 as well. And the reason why this is important to reach out for help is that there are numerous treatments to get you off of the opioids. We have medications that can help, procedures that can help, cognitive behavioral therapies that can help. I mean, there's so many things that can be done if you want to change. And if you're worried about chronic pain, realize opioids truly are not a solution for the vast majority of people, because again, you're just going to have to keep upping and upping and upping your dose. If you haven't met with a pain medicine specialist and looked into other options, interventions, different medications, if you haven't met with a psychologist who specializes in pain, we have psychological techniques as well that can help. There are so many options: injections, TENS units, for helping with your pain that doesn't put you on a track that could potentially end in death. It's worth exploring if you haven't done it already. And as I said, this grows in secret. The stigma around opioid addiction, the fact that people don't want to talk about it, that is killing a tremendous amount of people, because you do not start by using quantities or using products that could kill you. You usually start by just taking the pills that were prescribed to you, and then it grows and it grows, and we don't talk about it. And then ultimately that's when people end up in the emergency room, or that's when people end up dead. So make sure you talk about it if you or someone in your life is suffering from this. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If you have any questions, please send me an email, reach out to me. I'm all over social media pushing out new information and research as I see it. So please find me, talk with me. I'm happy to be a help if I can. And that's